The first chapter I wrote was a disaster preparedness group. I was thinking of a prepper group, a survivalist group. And so that chapter is completely done, and it's quite a complex chapter. The thing is, after I wrote that chapter, I realized almost nobody's going to be able to implement this. It's because it gets a little bit serious. Look, when it all falls to pieces, everybody's going to be scrambling around. Yes, they'll want to do this, but by that time, it'll be too late. You need to set these communities up now while we still have relative peace, relative freedom. We're not being, bombed, and the police aren't kicking down our door to give us an injection. Now is the time that we need to form these communities. So the disaster preparedness community is a huge chapter. It covers everything from shelter, nourishment, farming, medical, security, everything you need to work together to survive just about anything. But while working on that chapter, I realized that it's going to be difficult to implement that. It's not impossible. It's just going to be difficult. And a lot of people just aren't going to have what it takes to do that. But that doesn't mean there aren't numerous other types of communities that we can form right now that don't require the same kind of a commitment as a disaster preparedness community would require, and yet would still provide huge benefits to everybody involved. So basically, the table of contents, I will explain the historical cycles and the coming disasters in a little bit more detail. And then we go into a brief history of mutual aid. And so we go back. The other thing with communities is that it is part of our human nature. And the other reason why it is vital and will save your life. And, I was working with my friend, Dr. Ronald Kapp, who recently published a book on longevity and how to live to be 150. And one of the most important components of long life and health is being part of a community. It's not a surprise that these lockdowns have separated us. It's part of the insidious plan of the powers that be to sicken us and kill us. If you are not a part of the community, your incidences of Alzheimer's and dementia and high blood pressure and diabetes and arthritis goes through the roof. All those illnesses can be prevented or certainly lessened simply by belonging to a community, people that get together and share things. And that is a huge part of your health. If you don't have health, you're not going to survive what's coming anyways. So not only do we need to create these communities to support each other during the bad times that are coming, we need these communities right now for our mental and physical health. So I'm going to go through the history of communities and why it's so important. For example, I'm going to start off with tribes, which is the earliest form of community that human beings formed. Then we go on to monasteries, very common, a kind of a survivalist community. Monasteries was the way that many people survived the fall of Rome and the fall of the Chinese dynasties and the fall of Persia and the Middle East. Monasteries was a good way to survive these things. Then we go into, similar to monasteries, is religious and spiritual communes. Now, some of them worked, most of them did not. We go into the socialist communes. That was under the Soviet regime in Russia and under the Maoists in China, and why those things were a disaster. Those were communes that were an absolute disaster, and so we can avoid making those mistakes. I hear often from people that they're thinking of doing something along the lines of a socialist commune. They want to buy a big piece of property. They want to bring 50 or 100 people up there. Everybody's going to work on the farm. That's not going to work. And I'll explain exactly why that won't work. There are things we can do that will work, but that's not one of them. Also, the hippie and artist communes. I was part of a couple of hippie communes when I was traveling across the United States when I was 17. Joined into a bunch of hippie communes, and they all failed terribly. Artists' communes was a different thing. They tended to be more successful. I was a part of an artist commune when I lived in California in Ventura called Art City, and another commune called Green Art People, because I'm also an artist and I like hanging around with artsy fartsy people. I'm not that artsy fartsy myself, but I like the people a little bit better than I like, say, bankers and accountants. And those communes and communities tended to be more successful. And artist communities date way back to the 1860s, and they were quite successful. And I can explain why they were successful. Then we go, then we'll continue going further into the present, and we get into the, just after the Civil War was probably the golden age of what was called the mutual aid societies. Now, before our present government took over started providing social services like unemployment and Medicaid um, and retirement benefits, which, by the way, none of you are going to get. Before the government took that over, what did people do? What happened if you got sick? Who paid for the medical expenses? What happened if you wanted to retire, or if you were senile, or if you got laid off? How would you survive? Well, actually, people survived quite well, thank you very much. They survived because of mutual aid societies. Things like the Oddfellows Club and the Moose Lodge and the Elk Lodge. These were societies where, for the equivalent of one day's wages a year, these aid societies, are also known as fraternal societies, they were able to provide their members with health insurance, with retirement funds, with old age pensions, with burial costs, and even funding scholarships for students and helping to fund small businesses. These were fantastic organizations, and they did a lot of good. And not only did they do a lot of good, they were so successful because, just having, a few thousand people kick in $10 a month brought in a lot of money. And because it wasn't a government agency, and because it wasn't a for-profit organization, all that money actually went to do good. They became so successful that they went from providing medical care to building hospitals. A group in Michigan even bought property and established picnic grounds and a band shell and camping and even a small amusement park because they had the money to do that. The money we pay in taxes is obscene, and what we get back for that is nothing. We get 3 cents on the dollar back for what the government takes from us. But then what happened to the mutual aid societies, and this was hand in hand with the destruction of medical care in America, because what the mutual aid societies did is they hired doctors exclusively to look after their own members. So anytime somebody got sick, the doctor would go over to their house. And I'm still old enough to remember that if you got sick, the doctor came to your house. He had a little black bag, and he would examine you, and he would prescribe whatever medication if you needed medication. And it was rare that you would get a prescription in those days anyways, because they weren't pill happy. And it worked out really well for the doctor because they got paid whether the person was sick or not. And it was in their best interest to make sure everybody was healthy, because that way they'd have to work less. So now we have a system where the doctors are paid when you get sick, and the sicker you are, the more they get paid. So, the incentive is not on you getting healthy. But this was all started by the Rockefellers, who created the American Medical Association. And the first thing the AMA did was go after the doctors that worked for the mutual aid societies. And they refused to license them if they worked for mutual aid societies. So now, the very reason for their existence, being able to provide medical care for their members, was gone. Then the government came in with welfare after the Second World War, and unemployment insurance, and now the mutual aid societies were essentially destroyed. There's a few still around, but in a far decreased function that they did have when they were in the 1800s. Interestingly enough, the mutual aid societies really benefited the black community, especially after the Civil War. It was the mutual aid societies, exclusively black, that funded former slaves in buying farmland and farm equipment and starting up small businesses, small business loans. Who was going to do that? The banks? Nobody's going to do that. It was only the communities themselves that funded all that, and they were able to lift recently freed slaves out of dire poverty and start to bring them into a more wealthy environment. So this is the history of communities. And it's really important to understand what worked and what didn't work so we don't make those mistakes. Then we go into how to start a group. This is going to be a little bit tricky, but we're going to go into why people belong to groups, how groups are formed, how groups identify, because you need to, once you try to get people together, they need an identity that they belong to this group. And part of this identity is to create your own myth and rituals and symbols and passwords and secret handshakes and art and logos and stories. These are all elements that humans have had from the very beginning, going all the way back to tribes. This is what brings people together and holds them together. We, in the modern world, have lost our history. We have lost our identity. This is done on purpose. This is what the powers that be have done, is destroyed our ability to identify with each other and to relate to each other in a kind of a, through history and songs and folk tales and stories. And they've destroyed that in us, and that's why it's very difficult to form a group, and it's very difficult for that group to remain together. Then we go into key elements of group cohesion. Then the demographics. How should you form your group? You need to form your group around certain demographics. You cannot form a group. A group will not stay together if it's anybody's welcome. Unfortunately, as much as everybody wants to believe that everybody's equal and we can all just work together and sing kumbaya, that never works. You have to have a certain demographics. That's why after the Civil War, black mutual aid groups worked together really well, but they were exclusive to blacks. The other groups that worked really well together were the Amish, which are around to this day. But the reason the Amish worked together was they had a shared religious value. And so again, that was their demographic, was shared religious values. So once you understand that, we're going to get to getting started, how to found a group. So we have the founders, and that is one or two, maybe three people that will start the group, start the community. And in my program, founders are not the kings or the leaders or the bosses or the presidents. One thing that I include in the structure of setting up groups is complete democratic values. So you might be the founder, doesn't mean you're the boss. And so the founders can then recruit other members. And then we need to talk about how big the group should be. And it depends on what the purpose of your community is going to be. Some groups should be no bigger than 5 people. Some groups can go up to 50, 100 people. And again, it's going to depend on what your purpose is in founding that group. Then you're going to have to figure out how to screen members. Screening is a really important part of maintaining a community. You have to get good people in. This is what went wrong with the hippie communes. The hippie communes, they were, very, love and peace and open to everybody. And what happened was they got more and more people that were there for a free ride. and weren't contributing as much as they were expected to contribute. And it was the founding members that did all the work, and they, put in the extra hours and extra effort to keep the community going. But eventually what happens is you have too many freeloaders, and the founding members kind of throw up their hands and they leave, and the commune essentially disbands. So you need to screen people. And part of the screening process is everybody needs to sign a mutual agreement. I know it sounds awful that we have to resort to like a legal contract. And a legal contract is not so that we get to sue them if they don't do what they promised to do. The legal contract should actually never go to court, but rather it is a clear statement of what everybody is expected to do, what the rules and the regulations are. There have to be rules and regulations. Now, I'm an anarchist. I don't like rules and regulations, and I certainly don't want anybody to tell me what to do. But we need to have a mutual understanding of how everything is going to work, because we can't have, the 80-20 rule working in a community. Now, the 80-20 rule, for those who don't know, is that 20% of the people in an organization produce 80% of the benefits. So 2 out of 10 people do all the work. The other 8 kind of, go along for the ride. That won't work in a community. You can't have just 20% of the members doing everything and the other 80% going, well, yeah, I'll come next week to the meeting, but I'm busy this week. We can't have that, because that community won't last. So these things are all really important, and we got to outline them. So that this whole chapter is going into the details of, how to establish the ground rules and the purpose of the community. Then you need to understand the different types of legal structure that you need to establish. So do you want to establish an unincorporated, or an incorporated for nonprofit, or an incorporated for-profit community? Each one of those legal structures has benefits, and they also have benefits and drawbacks. And again, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your community, you have to seriously consider one of those 3 forms of legal structure. This will protect you, and it will also make the community more effective. So then, next chapter, charter and bylaws. You need to write a charter. Now, a charter is basically a mission statement. This is what we're trying to do. This is how we plan to do it. And then the bylaws are, this is what members can and cannot do within the community. Now, it's really important that we have a charter and bylaws. It helps to focus everybody for a purpose. It gives them a reason to be a part of that group. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. And these are the bylaws that protect the members from being exploited by outside forces or inside forces. So we go through we'll talk about all those things: how to draft a mission statement, how to draft articles of incorporation, how to draft the bylaws. I've got a list of bylaws. I've already written them out. In the book, you'll have the bylaws. You can print them out, add your name to it. If you like the bylaws, if you don't like them, you can mix and match. And so I've already done all that work for you. It's done. Because this is part of the big drawback when people are starting to put these communities together, is there's a lot of legal stuff. You have to research the types of legal structures, and then who's going to write the bylaws, and what kind of bylaws do you need, and what kind of rules do you need and don't need. And so it's a lot of writing, a lot of thinking. I've already done that for you. It's done. And I'm going to give it to you, and you can mix and match for whatever community you want to create. So draft bylaws. And then, of course, everybody's going to have to sign a statement of confidentiality. When you belong to this group, the secrets of the group is within the group. Now, you see all these secret societies, part of the reason they're all so successful is because they followed all this. All these secret societies have a charter. They're all confidential. They all have their group identification. They have their myth. They have their ritual. They have their ceremonies. Very important is to have ceremonies. And by ceremony, I mean something as simple as a Friday night sing-along around the campfire. You know, a couple of guys bring the guitars, violins, whatever you got. We'll all play and roast some hot dogs. That's a ceremony. And that's something that will bring people together and keep them together. But we have to establish that. Make it a part of the bylaws. You know, once a month canoe ride down the river, or we can do a music night or story night, or bring the kids over and we'll put on a play, things like that. These are all what I would call ceremonies, because it's an enacted, you act a part in a drama, which is what a ceremony is. And so everybody acts a part in the drama. You sing along, you paddle the canoe, you cook the hot dogs. You're all acting your part in that ceremony, but it's very important for keeping things together. That's what kept the tribes together. That's what kept the monasteries together. And that's what kept the mutual aid societies together. You know, the funny Moose Lodge hats that they wear, that was just part of the ceremony. Nobody took that stuff seriously, but it was kind of fun. And those kind of fun things keep people interested and motivated to continue with this. So, bylaws and confidentiality agreement, and we got to talk about a lot of things about property. What is property of individuals? What's property of the community? You know, we need to talk about what if one of the members becomes involved in criminal activities? What is the liability if somebody gets hurt? And what are the fees? Are you going to charge fees? How are you going to fund this? Part of bringing these communities together, and there's going to be a whole chapter on that, is the funding. How are we going to pay for this community? Typically speaking, such as the Mutual Aid Society, funding is done through monthly fees paid by the members. But there are other ways to get funding for that. For example, the Green Art people in Ventura, they got government grants. Hint for everybody out there: if you want a government grant, just put the word green in the application. It seems to be very popular these days. And then the distribution of resources. How is this community going to distribute their services and their resources to its members? Is it based on need, or is it based on absolute equality? I mean, these are all things we have to figure out. And many of these communities, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so then still included in this chapter on legal structure is how to run meetings, you know, meeting protocols, orders of business, how to vote. What if you want to get rid of a member? How to get rid of a member? These all need to be laid out in the charter, because sometimes you find somebody that's, you know, just causing a lot of trouble, and your screening process didn't keep them out. And by the way, I will have a test included in the book, and it will be a psychopathy test, so that you can identify potential psychopaths and keep them out. Because you let one psychopath in your community, that community will be destroyed. So it's really important that we have some kind of a screening process before we let just everybody in, because we've got to keep the psychopaths out. So now, this is all just the basic legal structure, the skeleton of your community, whatever it wants to be. Now, here's the different types of communities. We're going to the next chapter. Financial communities. Number one, the mutual aid societies, their original purpose was to provide medical services and also unemployment insurance and startup funds for new businesses and putting people through college, things like that. So under financial communities, we have lots of options. We have buying groups. This is probably the simplest community that you can form. Requires very little in terms of, you know, setting it up and money to run it and things like that. But it already provides huge benefits. A buying group is this. I go to the grocery store every week and I buy $100 worth of groceries. It's not a lot anymore. It barely gets me through a week. Now I've got 5 neighbors. They go to the grocery store every week. They spend $100 as well, say, for example. However, if we work together and buy as a group, then at the very least we get a membership at Costco, or we can even incorporate as a co-op and get a wholesaler's license, and then we can go directly to the wholesalers and buy our groceries there. Instead of buying from the retailers, we buy wholesale. And so right away, you're saving, 40% of your finances is being saved simply by working together. Also, you have a lot of leverage. Buying groups also include things as heating oil. There was a buying group in England. There was 20 houses that all bought heating oil. They all lived on the same block of houses, and they all paid a lot of money for heating oil. They formed a buying group, and they bought that heating oil in bulk for the entire block. And now they saved themselves 35-40% on their heating costs. If you can save yourself that kind of money, and you don't have to do anything out of the ordinary, no extra effort on your part, you just belong to a community, and you put in the money that you're going to spend anyways to buy heating oil, and you buy in bulk as a community, as a group. Another way a buying group works is, and this is getting back to the mutual aid societies, is health insurance. There are buying groups that incorporate as simply to buy health insurance. Now, recently I was looking into health insurance costs there in the States, and I was horrified to find out that people are paying up to $3,000 a month for health insurance. This is madness. This is insanity. But if you form a community, let's say you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 people, as many as you can, because the more you get, the lower your insurance premiums will be. And what you do is you form a co-op. And then again, we have to go back to the incorporation. It's a not-for-profit incorporation. And the only purpose, and everybody that is a part of that community is technically an employee of that group. And now you can buy group health insurance, just like if you were getting a health insurance from the corporation that you were working for. They buy a group health insurance policy, and because it's a lot cheaper to buy 50 policies than to buy one policy. And again, this is part of the benefits of forming a buying group, and very easy to do. It's not hard. It's not as difficult as forming a disaster preparedness community, where you really need to have quite a few skills. You need to be very careful how you incorporate it. This again is very simple. You write the charter, and you have some bylaws, and you incorporate. And it's nothing to incorporate. We can incorporate it in Nevada, and incorporate as a 501c nonprofit. And now you cut your health insurance costs in half. Other financial communities include giving circles and lending circles. Now, lending circles are amazing. This is your own independent financial forum. It's basically a mini bank. You create your own bank. This is very popular, and I saw it in action firsthand when I lived in China. This is what the Chinese people did. This is what Koreans do. So when you see, all these convenience stores, and they're run by Koreans, and people wonder, well, how could, somebody that just immigrated from Korea, now they're running a convenience store? How is that possible? Well, because they were part of a lending circle. And what the Koreans and the Chinese and the Filipinos and the Japanese, what they do is they form a group of people that work together, say 10, 20 people, and the way it works is that everybody pays a monthly fee into a kitty. Then you vote on what that money is going to be used for. And typically that money is going to be used to start a business. When the business is started, then the other members of the community help to run the business wherever they can. So the Koreans will buy a convenience store. Now everybody, first off, that's a member of that lending circle, they get all their groceries at wholesale. Because when you buy a convenience store, you get a wholesaler's license. So when you go to buy the wholesale groceries to sell at the convenience store, you also buy the groceries for the entire community. And again, you're saving, 40, 50% on groceries. And when things start to get tough and with inflation set to go through the roof, saving half of your costs for food is a big advantage to surviving what's coming. And so that's what they do. Now, the other thing they do is they all take turns. They all work a shift at the variety store. They each put in, 6 hours a week. So now you're not paying employees, which is a huge expense for every small business, but you have people that are putting in some free time into the business. Now, they're putting in that free time because when that business makes profit, they get the money. That's part of the lending circle. That's the whole purpose. They work together. They start the business. They all help to make that business successful, not only by donating time, but also by recommending them, promoting the business to their friends and relatives, and spreading the word around. Like, it doesn't have to be a convenience store. It could be a number of things. For example, the Quakers started a business. They built furniture and they built silverware, or they made silverware. And to this day, that silverware company is still in effect. It's called Oneida. So, these businesses, they were formed by these lending circles, by these communities, and you have a much better chance of success because all the people in the community want it to be a success, because if it is, they get money back. Now, what happens is when these businesses become successful, the money is put back into the kitty. Now, again, the individual members can vote. Do you want to take a dividend every month? Or do you want to keep it in the kitty and now invest in another business? So typically what would happen is, the Koreans would get the convenience store, and after a year, 2 years, it's making money. Everybody's happy. Now they're putting the money back into the kitty, and the next thing they're going to buy is a motel and restaurant. Same thing again. The members will volunteer their time to, clean the rooms and cook in the restaurant, and the money goes back into the kitty. And in this way, a small community funds one business after another. And each business, when it becomes profitable, and when you've got 20, 30 people really dedicated to making that business a success, it's not just you and your wife, it's not just you and the bankers. I mean, everybody's working to make this a success. It tends to be a success, and that money is, again, put back into another business, and within 10 years, these Koreans, they own a dozen businesses. They're invested all over, and now all these businesses are putting the money back into the kitty, and they're taking out a big dividend every month instead of putting into it. Again, it's fairly simple to establish these types of groups, and the legal structure is pretty easy. The charter is pretty easy. It doesn't take a lot of work, and yet the benefits are huge. And other forms of financial communities are those that will provide unemployment insurance, and again, it's the same sort of thing, or hardship aid. Everybody, kicks in $10 a month, $50 a month, depends on how you set it up. Then, if somebody, is going through a really hard time, well, they go to the community, the members vote, offer to give them $5,000 to get them through. So those are some of the financial communities. Okay, we're running out of time. Let me go more quickly. After that, you got the home and health communities. And again, this replicates some of what the old mutual aid societies did, which was, work on keeping people healthy. So home and health communities, one that everybody's heard of and is very easy to establish, is support groups. There are thousands of support groups. You can establish your own support groups, and they would be very beneficial, especially now we are seeing, suicide rates are epidemic. And like I said before, the fact that we don't belong to communities is killing us mentally and physically. And the mental stress, especially the last 2 years, people are losing it, and I feel bad for them. I speak to them when I'm doing my consultations, and I feel terrible because they're alone. Nobody looks after them. Nobody calls them. They don't speak to anybody. They don't have friends or family anymore. Um, it's soon they're going to be uh, drinking too much and taking drugs and getting addicted and becoming suicidal. Boy, do you need a support group. So we can form our own support groups. Moving along, the other thing, and this again, I have seen working firsthand, and I think is really crucial because one of the big problems of our society is the public education system. I tell everybody I know that to me, sending your child to public school is child abuse. Part of the reason that this society is going to destroy itself is because of public education. And the best thing you can do is to homeschool your children. But there's a big problem because homeschooling is a big commitment in time and money if you're just a small family. So husband and wife, okay, let's say the husband's got a job and he makes enough money that he can support the wife so she doesn't have to work. Okay, fine, then she can homeschool. But there's very few families now where you can that get by on just one income earner. So, but forming again a community of say 5 families, 10 families, 15 families that all want to homeschool. Now what you do is you instead of mom spending 12 hours a day trying to running after the kids trying to homeschool them, you've got 10 moms and they can all spend one day doing it, and you can switch around which house you have the classes held at, or you can even go to the local church. Usually they have a basement rec room, and you have 2 or 3 parents at any one time present, teaching the community, teaching the kids. So homeschooling co-ops is a huge benefit, and it allows people to make sure their kids are getting taught. And we've seen the studies. Every study shows that homeschooled kids outscore all the public school kids in every facet of education. So homeschooling, check-in check-in service. I've been talking about this quite a bit. It's really simple. You don't even have to organize anything. It's just simply people that will call in on other people once a day just to see how they're doing. This is especially important for seniors and people that are locked in, and people that are, that are ill and can't get around, and even people in our communities, because we're all so isolated. And just to have somebody call once a day and say, "Hey, Bob, how you doing? Everything okay? Get enough to eat? Anything you want to talk about?" Okay, 5 minutes a day. That's all you need to do. And then Bob calls somebody, and then he calls somebody, and then she calls somebody, and we set up what's called a telephone tree so that everybody makes 2 or 3 phone calls once a day on 2 or 3 people, and they all call 2 or 3 people, and they all call 2 or 3 people, so that within a half an hour, 25, 50 people have been contacted just to say hello, just to say hello. And that is already enough to create all kinds of health benefits and mental health benefits. Other things that can be done is you fund your own retirement homes. Also, we can fund our own homeless shelters. And under this category, I talk about the health insurance co-ops, which I just talked about. The other thing is gardening co-ops. We can work together and grow gardens, anything from renting a quarter acre from some farmers' fields and growing your own gardens there to, I've even seen city garden plots to rooftop gardens, and we can work together and grow our own gardens. And then finally, food co-ops, where we buy our own food and we redistribute that food to other people. So we sell the food through a co-op, but also it pays for our own food. So that's some of the groups that we can form under the home and health communities. And then finally, the disaster preparedness community. This is, if you're going to survive World War III, Mad Max, this is the community where we work together. We form search and rescue operations. We have neighborhood watch, citizen patrols. We grow our own foods. We become independent. We set up our own communication channels. We have our own MASH units, and you set up your own medical team and a place where people can go if they're injured, and we'll look after them. And that it would be, and when things get really rough, that would be the way to go to survive. So that is a quick rundown of the table of contents.